Okay, can everybody see my screen? Okay. Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, as Catherine said, my name is Leanne, and today I'm going to give a presentation on a media coverage that I looked at of the Central Park 5 case, which involves 5 teenagers who were wrongfully convicted of the rape and attempted murder of a female jogger in Central Park in the late 1980s. And to do this, I carry out a transitivity analysis. So what I will do is I will start by giving you an outline of the presentation. This paper is actually set in a wider context because at present I have a Marie Curie Global Fellowship, and I will show you the team members that I'm working with actually in a second. Some of them are here today. I will also explain a little bit about wrongful convictions, just to give you a brief overview of some of the things that have been done non-linguistic related, before going into transitivity a little bit, because you'll all be familiar with this anyway, explain my data set specifically, and then give you some preliminary results and conclusions that I've reached so far. So I hope you enjoy the presentation. Here you have the research team that I'm currently working with on the Marie Curie Global Fellowship. As I said, some of these faces will be familiar because they're here today. So basically, there is a team of us working on language analysis of certain data that relates to the area of wrongful convictions. In the photograph, you can see Professor Encarnación Hidalgo Tenorio from the University of Granada and Professor Maite Taboada at the top, who's based at Simon Fraser University. I'm working under the supervision of those two excellent scholars, as well as alongside Professor Tom Bartlett, who's here, and also Professor Lise Fontaine and Michelle Aldridge, who are based at Cardiff at the moment, where I'm currently based as part of the Marie Curie. And in the photo to my right is a guy called Lucas Chambers, who's a legend. He's doing his MA at the moment, and he's been helping a lot with the collection of the data that I've been working with, as well as some preliminary analysis for inter-rater reliability purposes. So as much as I'd like to take credit for this, I'm getting a lot of help with this research project in general. As I mentioned, the idea is to look at the analysis of language patterns, and more specifically in context of societal injustice. So I'm focusing at the moment specifically on wrongful convictions. And the data sets so far that I've managed to collect include courtroom transcripts of wrongful conviction cases, but I take the courtroom transcripts from the original trials. And so these people have been exonerated or freed and proven innocent since then. So I know that they were originally innocent. And the reason I do this is to have a look at whether the language that was used in the original trial may well have had an impact on the outcome of the case, because quite often there isn't really sufficient evidence, and therefore I think it would be interesting to see from a linguistic perspective whether language here is actually a contributing factor to wrongful convictions. I've also collected or carried out interviews with exonerees, because I feel like it would be good from a critical discourse analysis perspective to see how through their language choices they represent their experience with the justice system. And obviously today's paper, I'm going to present some findings on newspaper coverage of a case that was particularly well known, not just in the US where it took place, but on a more of a global scale. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to show you some findings of the media coverage from the Central Park 5 case, which, if you're not familiar with it, is basically a case that involved 5 teenagers who were wrongfully convicted, as I said, of rape and attempted murder. And I will show you a few more details as I move on to the methodology afterwards. The reason I chose this case is because most of you, I imagine, during the pandemic watched a lot of Netflix. So did I. Okay, this didn't stop my academic work, but I did watch a lot of Netflix. And so one of the things that they actually put on Netflix was a documentary about this particular case called When They See Us. And I found it very infuriating to watch. And so I thought it would be quite good to do a linguistic analysis of something that I felt quite passionate about. In addition, I actually follow the Central Park 5 wrongly convicted individuals on Instagram. And there was a post recently by one of them, Raymond Santana, who actually said that the media probably led to an unfair trial for the 5 of them when it took place. So again, I was thinking this would be quite good to look at to see whether his argument is actually legit or valid. And obviously we are all aware, if we've done CDA, the power of the media. So apart from the fact that this data is easily accessible by perhaps comparison to courtroom transcripts, I think it's very important to draw this to people's attention. Before I go on to talk about the more linguistic side of things, I just wanted to mention a few of the main causes of wrongful convictions as identified by those who work for one of the many innocence projects across the globe. And there's basically a network of Innocence Project organizations that are trying to help people who have been wrongfully imprisoned and fight their case in order to either release them from prison or, following this, help them gain some kind of compensation. And so from the Innocence Project, as well as those that have worked in criminology or law, they've so far identified the following reasons for wrongful convictions occurring. For instance, misidentifying a perpetrator, giving false confessions, which I admit maybe several years ago I would have said, but who would falsely confess to something? You just wouldn't, but actually it's not that straightforward. And you only need to watch the Netflix documentary I've just mentioned on the Supreme Court 5 to see how easy it would be for somebody to wrongly confess to a crime. Another issue with wrongful convictions that arises is tunnel vision, which refers to the idea of mainly when the police, but also the prosecution, hone in on a particular individual, and then as opposed to collecting evidence to prove a particular case, they hone in on a specific person or a specific group of people and then try to find evidence to prove that that person did it. This is problematic because you can end up obviously picking or choosing the wrong person and at the same time leaving the actual perpetrator out on the streets. Faulty forensics is another problem with wrongful convictions. And in fact, I presented in September at another SFL conference, the European one, an analysis of an interview I did with an exoneree who unfortunately lost her son in a fire. And she was sent to prison for 12 years because she was accused of arson and attempted manslaughter. And the main reason why she was sent to prison is because of faulty forensics, because they claimed that it had been an intentional fire set by gasoline that she'd been to the airport and bought and then thrown on the floor and set a fire. And it turned out it was an electrical fault with the radiator, but because somebody had obviously given faulty forensic evidence, then this didn't help her case. And actually in the interview I did with her, she said to me if she'd have heard that as somebody on the jury, she would have also convicted. Another thing that's brought up with wrongful convictions is jailhouse informant testimony, which to me is quite surprising because I wouldn't expect this to have much of an impact or be considered too credible. But according to Warden 2004, for instance, this is actually used quite often in cases and people can end up sentenced to prison time based on the testimony that's given by people already serving time in prison. These people, obviously, they also receive a reward for giving testimony. So I'm quite amazed that this is one of the reasons why people can find themselves wrongfully convicted. And lastly, they talk about police misconduct, which according to Covey in 2012 is understudied and something that should be looked at in more detail. My background is not in law, even though I'm passionate about this particular topic. Obviously, it's more in linguistics, and therefore what I'm trying to do here is see whether there are potentially other symptoms of wrongful convictions. And in the project that I'm working on for the Marie Curie, I'm suggesting that there actually might be a couple more. One, the linguistic representation in the courtroom, for instance, because we all know as humans that live in the real world, lawyers, when they give their arguments or they talk about particular evidence, they do it in a particular way with particular strategies to achieve their goal, which is to prove their side of the case. So I think this may have a bit of an impact, at least when we're talking about wrongful conviction cases. And obviously, I also think that the power of the media may again be a contributing factor. So yes, I would add these two primary symptoms to the list. Today, I said I'm going to focus on the transitivity analysis. I follow Halliday and Mathieson to a large extent. And so what I'm going to do actually today, although I've done an analysis of processes, participants and circumstances, given the kind of data set and what I'm interested in looking at, which is how the Central Park 5 are represented in the press, my findings in this presentation will focus specifically on the processes and the participants. If somebody at a later point wants to ask me about the circumstances, that's fine, but I won't be delivering that information in the presentation. So here, most of you, if not everybody, will be familiar with the transitivity system put forward by Halliday and Mathieson, have the main process categories. I appreciate there's also subcategories and then the participant roles. I should mention that the transitivity system, as I'm using it, in the project, the Marie Curie project, I'm trying to look at how useful it is for people who are doing critical discourse analysis. And so on that basis, I'm working on, this is work in progress. And as Tom was saying in his plenary before, I'm not saying one thing or the other, just that I think that there could be potential changes or modifications that could be made to help people who do CDA. So one of the things I've introduced in this particular analysis, at least, is something that Amy Neal in her PhD thesis suggests, which comes from the Cardiff grammar model of transitivity, and that is catering for a distinction between an agentive and a non-agentive sensor in the mental category, which would allow me to take certain process type or certain verbs from the behavioural process category and shift them across and place them under the mental category by making this distinction. That's not to say I remove the behavioural category altogether. I don't yet. But this is something I'm working on in the project in general, so I wanted to bring it up. And another thing I'm also considering, and I would love any feedback, I've talked about this with Tom a little bit as well, the idea of complex process category. I put this forward because those of you who've done transitivity analysis, a bit like what David was saying before about classifying will, it's not always simple to just put it into one category. You need sometimes to literally put it in several. And so I'm thinking here that it may not be a bad idea, especially for critical discourse analysts, to consider the option of accepting that it belongs to two or more realms of experience and therefore classify certain verbs instead as a complex process. This is an idea, okay? It's not anything that is yet coming to fruition, but it's something I'm also putting forward at the moment as part of the project. Okay, so to move on to my data, as I said, I look at the media coverage of the Central Park 5 involving 5 teens who were wrongfully convicted of the rape and attempted murder of a woman called Trisha Maley. The 5 teens, I think it's important that people know who they are. So there is Raymond Santana, Yusuf Salem, Kevin Richardson, Antrim McRae, and Corey Wise. All of these were aged 14 to 16 years at the time, and the main reason why they were convicted is because each of them gave a false confession after police applied significant pressure to them to tell them what had happened in the park that night. Between them as well, they spent over 35 years in prison, with Corey Wise spending the most amount of time, and he served 12 years. I collected the newspaper articles using LexisNexis, the online database that has availability for newspaper articles as well as courtroom judgments, actually. And so far, and I say so far because this is something I want to keep working on, I've collected 132 newspaper articles. What I did was I took data that was available from 1 month following when the rape actually took place, which was on the 19th of April, 1989. And I also took data from a month before the first trial. And I say the first trial because with there being 5 defendants, they had 2 trials, one with 3 of them and another one with the other 2. And the reason behind this, or apparently the reason behind this, is so that the prosecution can present the evidence in a particular order, which is also a little bit worrying from a wrongful conviction perspective. So this is the data I've taken so far, and today I'm going to present what I've managed to analyze so far, which maybe doesn't seem like a lot, but trust me, it took me ages. Okay, so you have here around 20,000 words so far analyzed, and this is something, as I say, that I'm going to keep working on before I intend to publish this as a paper, I hope. In order to do the data analysis, I used the UAM Corpus tool by Michael O'Donnell. And I really like this tool as well because it allows you to do an analysis of several different SFL types of analysis, whether that's modality, for instance, then, or appraisal or transitivity. And it also allows you to do it manually or automatically. The reason I use a manual one is I want all the errors to be my own. And in addition to that, I also want to have the opportunity to make amendments to the transitivity system, as I told you before, I'm trying to do at the moment. So it gives me more flexibility. It means it takes longer, but I think it's worthwhile doing. But the good thing about the tool is that it allows you both options. And for today's presentation, I have 2 research questions. I did have 3, but I only have 20 minutes. So I have 2 research questions. One is, did the media portray the Central Park 5 as guilty before the trial even commenced? And do they portray Trisha Maley as what you might class the ideal victim? And I use the term the ideal victim in the sense of how Susan Estrick, a woman who wrote a book on real rape, talks about the ideal rape victim, the woman that doesn't wear provocative clothing, which gets attacked by somebody who's hiding behind a bush, a complete stranger. And so by presenting potentially Patricia Maley in this light, it just worsens the situation for the alleged attackers. So I'm going to explore this a little bit now in the findings. Okay, so to address question 1 first about whether the media portray the Central Park 5 as guilty before it commenced, my starting point was to look at the frequency of particular process types, and perhaps unsurprisingly, material and relation are the most common. I was talking the other day as well to Lee Fontaine a little bit about this, and we were saying how this is not uncommon anyway in that sense. This is the general trend in English, so this is not a huge surprise. That doesn't mean that I'm still not interested though in looking at who is doing then the things here, or who is being ascribed particular qualities. And it did catch my attention that there's quite a high number of verbal processes here, so I'll also comment on them as well before I finish the presentation. If we look at the material processes, I found that there is almost 1/3 of the clauses that show the actor is actually the Central Park Five, whether it's them as a collective or individuals of the Central Park Five group. And quite often, and probably unsurprisingly, the material verbs that go hand in hand with when they're an actor tend to be of a negative nature. So struck somebody, punched them, kicked them. They also use the term wilding, which was a term coined at the time, and I've learned this recently, a term that was coined at the time to suggest people who were out in the street harassing, beating people up, and doing obviously negative criminal activity against other people just at random. That's not to say the Central Park Five weren't also in goal position. So they were also the impacted entity, but it tended to be in cases where they were being charged with a crime. So again, it's still negative. And on very few occasions, there are examples of where the defense lawyers were able to put forward their side of the story and talked about how the Central Park Five were, for instance, rounded up by racially prejudiced police. So what this tells me really is that there's not a universal coverage of the Central Park Five are bad and this woman is perfect. But based on some of the findings, it does lead at least to a biased perspective potentially of each of the participants, from what I can tell. When you look at the relational processes, you can see that when the Central Park Five are carrier, which is in almost, again, a third of cases, again, the associations tend to be negative. They were animals, emotional drifters. They're compared to being true sociopaths. And when they talk about their confessions as well, because as I said before, the prosecution, the only case they had was based on the false confessions that were given by them, but they're portrayed in the press as being voluntary and therefore presumably true or credible. That's not to say, again, that there weren't instances where the Central Park Five were presented in a less negative light. So they weren't trouble necessarily. They were regular school attenders. So they maybe were good students and they didn't come from necessarily a very bad background. So again, there isn't universal coverage here of them being bad people and then they must be responsible for the crime. If we move on to the second research question about how Patricia Maley is portrayed in the press, she also appears as the actor of material clauses, but obviously not necessarily portrayed so negatively. So she's almost actually, and I see this as well when I show you the relational findings, almost hailed as like a hero or a miracle woman, because she was able to she almost died, and yet she came through it all and she returned to her job, and she's an investment banker and somebody who's managed to even things like conquer a fever and so on. Obviously, she appears often as a goal, and that's unsurprising. She was the victim of a crime, and when she appears as the goal of a victim of a crime, she appears alongside, again, negative material clauses. As I mentioned, when she's in the relational process clauses, she's hailed as a hero, has become a symbol of courage, for instance, you have as an example here. And one other thing that caught my attention with the relational processes in general was the focus on, as I say before, race. Because I find it interesting when the media comment on things about the color of people's skin, like she was white and the attackers are allegedly black. I don't see what this has to do with anything, but again, it will obviously have an impact on the readership and so on. So I just thought it was important to bring it to your attention here. Okay, I mentioned I wanted to quickly talk about the verbal processes because I found them very common by comparison to what I might have expected. And so I was thinking, who's been given a voice and who's been silenced? And it turns out that authority figures are given a voice. And I was thinking, okay, which authority figures are we talking about? And when we compare the police and prosecution with the defense lawyers, we find that the police and the prosecution have 30% of verbal clauses where they are placed in a sayer position, by comparison to just 9% for the defense. So obviously both sides are given a voice, but one side of the story is being heard a lot more than the other side of the story. So again, we have, in my view, quite a clear bias here in the media about who's being able to say what actually, or allegedly, sorry, happened in this crime. Central Park Five members are also given a voice here, obviously not very often, but even still, but when they are, it's usually, again, to either incriminate themselves, so what they allegedly told the police at the time, or as negative sayers by bragging about what it is that they allegedly did. So again, they don't come off very well here. Okay, I have no idea, Catherine, how long I've taken, but I'm now on the conclusions. So to answer the research questions in summary, do the media portray the Central Park Five as guilty before it starts? In my opinion, to an extent, yes, they do. Because of these reasons, they place them in the position of actor of very violent actions. One other thing I noted, and I don't really I don't comment about it in the presentation, But it would be interesting to look at. There was a paper by Clark in 1992 who looked at the way in which female rape victims and perpetrators were represented in the Sun newspaper. As somebody from Liverpool, I don't read the Sun, but she looked at the way in which they were portrayed using transitivity and also a naming analysis. And that's something I'd like to explore further here, because when you look at the data that I've retrieved so far, the Central Park Five are named in particular ways. So as a wolf pack, a roving gang, marauding youths, and this also obviously doesn't help their case in the lead up to the trial when they're being talked about in the months leading up to when they're about to go to trial. And there's obviously frequent negative associations using both this naming analysis as well as the relational processes that we saw before, like describing them as animals and so forth. To answer question 2, whether Patricia Maley is represented as the ideal victim, again, I would say to an extent, yes. She's a white female working as a bank investor. She's attacked out of the middle of nowhere by allegedly a gang of violent youths. And on top of that, when she does come through it, she's like this miracle lady hero, which obviously she has been attacked, and it's awful. But I think that actually worsens the situation for the Central Park Five in the way that it's very contrasting by the way in which they're represented in the press or the media. In terms of the methodology, I mentioned before that I used obviously transitivity, and I'm making modifications to behavioral processes. WIP means work in progress, and obviously feedback welcome. And likewise, the same for the complex processes is something I'm considering and I hope to continue to work on throughout the duration of the Marie Curie. I mentioned that the analysis I've done so far is around 20,000 words. I have done the analysis on my own, so I appreciate that the examples I've given today or in general could potentially not be agreed upon with other people, but the idea then is for me to, before this paper is published, with, for instance, Lucas Chambers at SFU or other members of my team, ask if a certain number of examples can be also annotated in order to ensure iterative reliability or at least minimize the potential for bias. And in terms of future avenues, I would like to analyze more of the corpus I've collected, as well as collect more newspaper data in general, because as I said, I've taken 2 specific periods. I think it would be good to also look at other cases of wrongful conviction, because I appreciate the media as well, when they do their coverage, they have particular ideas in mind or objectives themselves. And so it would be interesting to see whether they follow similar patterns for other cases that are more or less renowned. And finally, because I'm an SFL person, I think it would be quite good to use other frameworks as well, such as, for instance, appraisal in this type of data, where we're looking at how people are being represented, evaluated, possibly to reinforce the findings or potentially bring other things to the surface that don't come out in the transitivity analysis. So yes, here you have a list of references that I've used, which are based on CDA, transitivity, wrongful convictions. And thank you very much for your attention. I also wanted to mention, if I'm allowed, that before I finish, in 3 weeks' time, I'm running a 10K race. Well, a race. I'm going to run 10K as best I can in Aintree in Liverpool to try to raise money for the wrongfully convicted. Because when they're released from prison, unlike people who go to prison because they've actually committed a crime, they come out quite often, unless the state where they're living, for instance, in the US, offers them compensation, they can be asked to leave prison and get no help whatsoever. So then they have to find somewhere to live. They need help finding a job and explaining where they've been the last 12 years or 15 years. So I figured if I could raise some money, then that could go towards helping these people. So if people don't mind, and there's no pressure, when I finish the presentation and we've done the questions and the answers, I may put the link in the chat, just in case anybody would like to sponsor me on the GoFundMe. And yeah, thank you very much. I'm finished, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. And we do have some time here for questions or comments, reactions, or to ask about circumstances. Get included, but you have some thoughts on as well. So I'll open the floor now to questions, comments, reactions. Well, as we wait for some of those, I do want to ask you, just for a teaser, about your thoughts about circumstances, because you piqued my interest there.
As in what kind of circumstances appeared?
Yeah. What were you looking at closely there?
Basically what I did was I used Halliday and Matheson's classification of circumstances, because I also struggle a little bit with this, I'm not going to lie, in terms of like the categorizations of them. And because of the type of data I think I was dealing with, or the story I was dealing with, then there was a lot of circumstances of location, time, because it was reporting constantly. A lot of the articles just repeat the same ideas. So there was a lot of circumstances of either location or like time and when, or alternatively cause and purpose and things like this. These were probably the most common across them, but I'm not surprised because of the story itself that I'm looking at in the press. I'm assuming if I looked at other kinds of media coverage stories, it may be slightly different. But yeah, that was, I guess, the general idea. Yeah, nothing too interesting. This is why I focused also on the processes and the participants. But that was the general outcome.
Awesome. I can see that you have a question here. Jen, is that your hand?
Okay. It is. Good early morning from Vancouver. Nice to see you, Leanne.
Nice to see you as well.
You weren't just slagging circumstances, were you?
No, not at all. But in fact, when we did integrated reliability, I may contact you as well.
They're hard. But all I just wanted to say is that, I mean, we often think about metaphoricity with noun groups and grammatical metaphor and nominalizations, but I think that there's some shifty ones in circumstances as well. And things as a location can be within an ideology or a framework, and that might be sort of in guise of perspective, but it gets automatically coded as a location, and I think that would be interesting. And I also think, and I respect that you're looking at the statistical frequency, but I think that some of those rare ones can actually really be quite powerful, of role and guise and such can punch above their weight. Yeah, so I'd be curious to have further conversations with you about that.
No, yeah, I'd love to. Actually, Lise Fontaine, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but the other day as well, we were talking about, it's interesting to look at like what's also not frequent. Because here I've presented on what's frequent, but that's true. Like what's not frequent is also, okay, what's not frequent is also obviously worth considering. And so, yeah, I would love to talk to you, Jennifer, anyway, but yeah, that's a really good point.
You know, if it's been omitted or elided, I mean, that happens with
Exactly.
nominalization and agency. So certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually in the data set as well, there was a lot of nominalization, which surprised me. I wasn't expecting so much actually, but there was a lot. And that's also something I'm working on with the transitivity system a little bit as well. So yeah.
Yeah, where's that agency been absolved?
Exactly, yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was a lot of the attack, for instance, or the rape, or
right. It's a thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so the rape of Patricia Millie or the attack. Yeah, there was a lot more than I expected. Well,
interesting.
Yeah.
Might you do a topographical analysis of the rates of condensation and expansion?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm open to anything. Yeah. And also, like I say, this is because I feel like I've touched the surface with this, but wrongful conviction is something I feel really, really passionate about. I have done since my PhD, as some people also know. And so it's something I also want to do long term, looking at, you know, how important the language is in these kind of instances, whether it's from the media, the courtroom, whatever. So yeah, absolutely.
I'm afraid to say there's a fair bit of robust data in Canada as well.
Yeah, I know. I'm in touch with
and that's very racially charged, some of it.
I know. I'm in touch with Innocence Canada, and I work a little bit on a voluntary basis alongside them as well. And yeah, there's more than there should be. You're right. But I mean, I read as well in the US, because I'm shocked as well by the figures. According to the US figures, 3 to 4% have been wrongfully convicted that are in prison right now. And you think, okay, that doesn't sound like very many, but if there's 100,000 people, that's 4,000 people that are sat in jail innocent. So yes, I don't think with my linguistic analysis we're going to change that, but I kind of hope to draw awareness to it at least. I'd like to think if I ever went on a jury, I would be more objective when I went onto the jury.
They'd never let you sit. You're too smart.
I know, and I'd be like my mum as well. Like, no, they're innocent. Like, they're innocent. So,
I'm sorry to monopolize your attention, but one more thing that comes to mind in terms of elision or omission and our nice, polite country of Canada, and how much racism may be elided from some of these discussions, where they might get away with being more upfront about it in the States and in American discourse, but in Canada, we're just so much nicer about our racism here.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
For anybody who's reading a transcript, I was being sarcastic.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to see you as well.
Leanne, there was just one more question here in the chat from Lise, asking if you removed duplicate statements from the data.
Yes, I did. The ones, well, at least when I used LexisNexis and it asked me to remove duplicates, then I gave it a tick. Yes, please. But I still found a lot of the data it seemed to be very repetitive. It seemed to reproduce the same ideas basically over and over again. But yeah, I did. I did.
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem with working with journalistic text, and that there's often a singular source that gets distributed, and you might not have it verbatim identically represented, but it might skew some of your results.
Yeah, that's true. I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lise.
Well, thank you, Leanne, as well. And please do feel free to put that link in the chat there.
Oh, I will do. Yeah, I will. Thank you.
Join me in thanking Leanne for her presentation today. And now we turn it over to Dr. Pham. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me very well?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. So could I start now?
Please do, and feel free to share your screen if you'd like to or not.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here and the first International Online Systemic Functional Linguistic Interest Group. Today, my paper is about grammar metaphor as information packaging in the mass media. My presentation will consist of 5 parts: introduction, literature review, methodology, result, and discussion, and the last part is conclusion. First, I would like to introduce about my paper. My paper aimed at the investigation of grammar metaphor through the using of nominalization as information packaging in news text. The information structure consists of focus, theme, or topic, and givenness, as well as their commentary notions of rhyme or common, background, and newness, respectively. This paper was chiefly about using normalization as grammar metaphor in information packaging in the structure of the text and thematic progressions with the category at text level, which is macro theme, the subcategories at the paragraph level, which is theme, and lexeme, which is micro theme. The second part, I would like to talk about literature. First, I would like to talk about register and thematic progression. Information packaging is a process of conveying information into the context of discourse through linguistic means. Information packaging can be defined as a subdivision information structure and comprises notions like topic, focus, comment, background, theme, rhyme. The function of information packaging is related to the interaction, which can be described in the following table. Look at the table, you can see function of information packaging, interaction pattern, meta function, and register. According to Martin 1992, method of development is departure of a text, while point is the destination. Its theme is the speaker's view of things. The new is the destination that the speaker takes the listener to. Hypertheme is the feel, which is the content of the spoken or written text, and hyper-new is what the listener has learned. If macrotheme is the way in, then macro-new is where they have been. In other words, a text can be compared to a trip in which the method of development can be considered as a route taken, while point explain why interlocutors when regarding their experiences of the world. Method of development works out the plan, and point is carrying out the plan. Meanwhile, model responsibility helps accommodate interlocutors to make ongoing assessment of meaning. According to Halley 1985, theme rhyme formation is in the clause is writer-speaker oriented. That is, the theme is what the writer-speaker is expressing. Given new structure is listener-oriented, since new is news to the listener. Therefore, theme and new interact with discourse semantics in various ways. The contrast is chiefly in the range of meaning through theme and new interaction. The focus of theme is on the interlocutors involved in the anecdote, whereas the focus of the new is on the telling of story. Therefore, theme reflect the genre of a text, and new elaborates the field to be developed in the experiential term. The second thing I would like to talk about is the discourse analysis of news texts. Textual orientation of the discourse influences or system of at the level of discourse semantics, which are negotiation, identification, conjunction, and ideation. News texts are a form of monologue in which the discourse focuses on the information structure. And so, in terms of interpersonal metafunction, different communication channels connect the writer and the reader. This is non-contact in writing and reading. News texts are a type of text in which language reconstruct what has happened. According to Holiday's categorization, the choices open to a speaker writer into potential and the actual. The potential consists of the meaning choices open to language user to convey simultaneously three meaning potentials. They are ideational, which represents human experiences as content, the interpersonal, which interacts human relationship, and the textual metafunctions show how text is created and how it's related to itself, which is cohesion, and to the text of context of use, which is coherence. The ideational metafunction is further stratified into experiential and logical metafunction. Ideational metaphor is created through the grammatical process of nominalization, by which a verb or an adjective is converted to a noun. According to Holiday and Mathiassen's 2014, nominalization is the single most powerful resource of creating ideational grammatical metaphor. Processes which are congruently worded as verbs and properties, which are congruently worded as adjective, are reworded metaphorically as nouns. Instead of functioning in the clause as process or attribute, they function as things in the nominal group. Then I would like to talk about the metafunctions in normalization. According to Atkins 2004, in terms of discourse semantics, experiential meanings, which is a grammatical metaphor, focus on the action that human agents carry out, while interpersonal meanings focus on the role relationships with our people and their attitude to each other. Therefore, experiential meanings appear objective in scientific reports. As for textual metafunction cohesion regarding discourse semantics, the textual meaning are clarified with the use of discourse markers. They are the signal of cues that point to the important ideas and feature of text and play a very important role in making the text coherent because they link the idea together. Now, there are some examples I would like to clarify to make clear my point of view. The example 8, after our tour of the ring, we just wait. Sentence B, our tour of the ring is prior to our wait. And our tour of the ring is the antecedent of our wait. As you can see, the connected after in sentence C is semantically and formally normalized into the antecedent. And then the process of normalization. Normalization is the process in which non-nominal structural elements are changed into nominal elements. Normalization was seen as a major resort to create metaphorical realizations of semantic categories in pieces of writing, academic writing, according to the views from systemic functional linguistics. Language learners' awareness of using normalization as a means of packing information contributed to improving the academic written work. The systemic functional perspective on normalizations is very much closely related to the concept of grammatical metaphor, and this create metaphorical rather than congruent lexical grammatical realizations of semantics categories. In the following two more examples, we can see in example D, Jack was unhappy, so Jill left. It's congruent. And in example E, Jack's unhappiness led to Jill's departure. It's metaphorical. So we can see sentence E uses normalization, which is the evolution of writing in English, while sentence D is a congruent structure using spoken English. All these things are reflected in the aspects of meta functions, which I've already mentioned, interpersonal, experiential, and textual in the systemic functional theory. So this is a conceptual framework. As we can see, the sentences, the theme may be the congruence and the newness after the metaphorical relations or normalization, it will become the theme in the next sentence. This process is the information packaging. In written English, relatively few clauses per sentence are used. This can be done by packing the text by turning verbs into nouns to increase the lexical density. The normalization becomes the grammatical metaphor in which the meanings is congruently realized by the other language pattern, leading to the process of information packaging. For the methodology and textual data, in my paper, I have done a survey of 1,000 English news texts. I use a classifier to identify nouns and normalizations in these texts, and the result showed the number of nouns and normalizations in the following table. As you can see, the statistic of 1,000 English news texts, the total word is 402,293. The number of nouns are 135,130, and the number of normalizations are 39,649. From the 1,000 news texts, after the total number of 402,293 words, the number of nouns, 135,130, accounting for 33.5%, whereas the number of normalization is 39,649, accounting for 9.8%. The normalization variants help the writer to achieve lexical economy, and at the same time, packing as much information as required in the nominal groups, which make new texts exhibit characteristic of textual discourse. Results and discussion. New text, typical text, can be analyzed to find out the distribution of nominal groups being in the process of information packaging, with a noun or noun phrase working as the theme. The reference noun can be co-referenced with a noun or a noun phrase working as the theme in the previous sentence. The theme noun can be the synonym to the head noun, which is the superordinate identified by the determiner, with a noun or a noun phrase working as a newness. The reference noun, when replacing predicates of a sentence, can be a generalization noun used to show a concept, a fact, an event or state, or a quality. If a co-reference noun is used alternatively in a news text, then that noun or noun phrase will become a reference determined by reference factors to perform the function of newness. In an English news text, nominalization is used as theme or newness using reference can work out the thematic cohesion and the content distribution. Experiential and logical meaning depend on each other and can be shown in a foreign extract of an English newsletter. And we look at the an extract from the Wall Street Journal. Here, Japan revised upward its academic growth data for the October-December quarter, confirming that the economy expanded at a surprising strong pace during the period. The government said yesterday that gross domestic product, the widest measure of academic activity, grew 1.3% in the fourth quarter, or an annualized rate of 5.5%. The figure was even higher than the robust quarterly growth of 1.2%, or 4.8% annualized, released last month as a preliminary result. The upward revision was due primarily to stronger than expected capital spending. Corporate expenditure on plant and equipment grew 3.1% from the third quarter, higher than a 2.2% increase in the earlier announcement. Another contributor was public sector investment, which increased 1.7% higher than 2.7% increase announced previously. In the about the news text, the words, can you see the words surprising pace revision are the form of normalization. Experiential meaning can be realized through normalization without affecting conjunctive relations. The normalization, the upward revision here is the incongruent subjects. The congruent subject is Japan. With normalization as theme, experiential and logical meanings interact each other when the outside conjunctive relations are realized. This interaction creates a high-level degree of abstractness of a text, especially in news text. Sometimes cause it difficult for reader to understand the phrase upward revision become theme in the phrase stronger than expected. Capital spending become newness. The phrase have been normalized with the verb words and the preposition due to with the logical meaning. With the normalizations used as newness, experiential meaning becomes a complex process. However, the popular form of experiential metaphor related to actions and quality can be seen in this paragraph. The function of metaphorical quality and action function is packaging experiential meaning for realization of newness. Therefore, the grammar metaphor is the process of referencing. Specifically, the phrase surprising strong pace is realized from quickly, right? The normalization growth is back from the verb grow. And the now phrases upward revision is packed from the verb to revise. The nouns increase from to increase or to rise. This process of realizing grammatical metaphor and normalization can be seen in the following table, table number 3. So we see the quality, congruent, quick, and metaphorical relation is surprising strong pace. Wide, congruent, metaphorical relation with, and the process become contributor, expand, become expenditure, expansion, spending, investment, investor, growth, change, consumption, analyze, annual, with the noun. Upward with the noun, and cooperation may cooperate with the noun, for example, expenditure here. So these are the metaphorical realization and experiential meaning. For conclusion, in a new text using grammatical metaphor as information packaging, there's a remapping between semantics and lexical grammar. Grammatical metaphors, in other words, are narrow self-categorized transitions. In particular, the experiential metaphor is the nominalization process. Nominalization is a form of changing the rhetorical meaning or meaning of speech beyond a clause. Nominalization in English is a series of transformations in the form of words themselves, either in the primary without suffixes or in the addition of suffixes. The process of normalization is the packaging of normalization of information. The use of grammatical metaphors as information packaging through normalization is often used to make the writing become simpler and clearer in terms of grammatical structures. It also contributes to bettering the writing style. The purpose of analyzing a text is to explain why the text is meaningful as it should be, and why it has a particular impression. Grammatical metaphor through use of normalization used in language, the language of mass media, by which a speaker or writer arrives at some point or newness regarding his or her expression in a new text. Hopefully future research will try to carry out more investigation or meta functions in evaluations of the writer to help the mass media out of the bias, leading to successful communication academically and culturally. These are my references. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for that interesting presentation now. Yes, please, audience, join me in thanking our third presenter for this session. We have about 7 or 8 minutes here for some questions, comments, reactions, and I open the floor for those. Perhaps I'll get us started with one, and then Jen, you can go next. We just heard Leanne in the previous presentation mention a degree of surprise at how much nominalization she found in the collection of news reports she was working with. Yes. And I wondered actually if there was any element of surprise to you in the amount of nominalization you found.
I collect the piece of writing, and then I use a classifier to identify the nominalization. I collect from Wall Street Journal and other pieces of news from various newspapers, and I use a classifier. And I realized that in some very strict piece of news like editorial or scientific piece of news, the density of normalization is very high. The more important thing is that it helps the writers avoid the bias, which often happen in the news mass media nowadays. Especially we know that the media nowadays, they have been classified into neutral, left wing or right wing, right? Mm-hmm. And then if we try to use this one, our news reports will be very, we say very neutral, not affected by anything.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so interested in that relationship between language choice and the perception of bias in news. Yeah, really interesting. David, I see your hand.
Hi, yes, thanks for that. It's very interesting. Have I got my video on? Yeah, okay. I was just wondering, maybe you mentioned this or maybe I missed it. Could you tell me what was the software or the tool that you used for doing your identification of nominalizations?
Actually, we asked the computer technician to write software, and
right.
we asked the computer professional to write software, and this software can identify the nominalization. We label the ontology. We build the ontology. In the ontology, we label the noun with the suffix or the prefix. In other words, we use the term we tag or label, and the computer software will help you to classify.
Okay.
I think
Good,
it's
good.
very we can do it if you're interested, and then we can contact, and then we can do it.
Right. Good. I was just wondering, do you have any ideas of have you done any sort of tests to identify how accurate it is? Do you have a kind of an accuracy estimate of how effective it is?
Excuse me, can you repeat the question?
I was wondering, have you done any sort of checks or tests to identify how accurate the computer software is?
The only way that we try to run it many times, 2 to 3 times, and the result were the same, and then we know that it's accurate.
Okay.
We run it many times.
Mm-hmm.
We decided to put the input into the software, and we let it operate and run, and then after some time, so we have the result, and we test it again, and we test it again, and then we have the same result, and we know that it's accurate. So we have to test many times.
Okay, thank you.
Jen, I know you might have a question still as well.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I just, when you were talking about things being packed up and looking for the elimination of bias, of course, you're removing agency through agency can be removed through nominalization. When you take out who's doing what, it becomes an event. But I'm wondering if that might also actually indicate some bias, that nominalizations aren't actually neutral if we just say it happened and we don't say who did what. And so I just want to interrogate the whether you're categorizing nominalizations as neutral or not.
So this is one we because thank you for your question, because you mentioned about we try to avoid the doer, okay, by focus on the action, and we normalize the action, and the bias will be less.
I think that's what I'm questioning, if it is less, because you can absolve responsibility, which, so
Yes.
an example that we have when we talk in Canada about colonization, it's a thing, it sounds neutral, but in fact, it isn't a neutral activity.
So it depends. Since we only choose mostly the scientific reports, we don't choose the political reports. So yes. So I think it might help to avoid bias, but then to avoid, usually we chose the scientific reports, but partly it still involves some political or some sensitive or reports. So this kind of way will help to reduce the risk of being biased.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can hear that conversations about where and how we analyze for ideology within our community of scholarship remain, popular questions of inquiry and topics of conversation. Dr. Fong, thank you so much for your presentation today. And do please feel free to put your contact info in the chat as well for anyone who might want to reach out with additional questions or comments. We are now turning to our last presentation of the session. Alam, the floor is all yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for your question and thank you for your comments.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, cool. I'll try to share my screen.
Yes, Dr. Pham, if you hit stop share.
Yes.
Yeah, there we go. Then we can switch the slides too.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can you see my screen?
I think it's coming up now.
Okay.
Are others able to see it, or do you just see a message that screen shares?
Not yet.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. All right. Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you for being here. It's my pleasure to be part of this international event. So I'd like to thank the organizing committee for this opportunity. I am Ahlim Jandoubi. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Sfax in Tunisia. And my PhD thesis is on construing experience through nominalization in English and Arabic news reports and editorials, under the co-supervision of Professor Aqila Salemi Bakhlouti and also Dr. Lise Fontaine, who I'd like to thank very much for their support and for being here today. So my thesis deals with both typological and contextual factors of nominalization, from relying basically on an SFL perspective, but also drawing inspiration from cognitive grammar, which are argued to be complementary. So today I'll restrict my talk to construing experience through nominalization in English and Arabic news reports. So basically just the typological factors. So I'll start with an introduction. I'll go on to cover the methodology used for this study, then results in discussion, and then conclusion. I'd like to start with a statement of the problem. So nominalization is one way to construe experience. In fact, making meaning nominal is a choice, and it affords certain things, it enables certain things, as argued by Fontaine. And there is an increasing interest in nominalization, but it is still largely understudied. Relying on SFG and drawing inspiration from cognitive grammar, the present study aims to compare and contrast nominalization in English and in Arabic. And Salemi Bakhlouti has shown the value gained in using a contrastive approach to study systems of meaning. Nominalization has been studied mainly in academic writing, still largely understudied. This research, however, investigates news reports dealing with the same topic, namely immigration, to reduce the impact of field. I'd like to start with the definition of nominalization first, because it is defined differently across the literature. And there's actually still the descriptive view that considers it a word formation device that transforms a word that is not a noun into a noun through morphological processes. And this is done in English through the addition of suffixes, as in press, pressure, through conversion, like change verb, and then change noun. In Arabic, this is done through change of templatic pattern, because English and Arabic have different morphological systems. So for example, wafaqa can be turned into a noun, muwafaqa. However, nominalization is far more complex than that. It is classified under nominality, which is a way of making meaning nominal. So in this study, nominalization is examined as a type of experiential grammatical metaphor. In other words, it is a process whereby an experience originally realized via a clause is reconstrued as a nominal group. So my study looks at how a figure is reconstrued as an element, and grammatically how a clause is reconstrued as a nominal group. Some form of grammatical metaphor is found in all languages and in all uses of language, as argued by Halliday and Matheson. So to take Langaker's example, the clause, the Boston Bridge collapsed, can be turned into the collapse of the Boston Bridge. And this process is also present in Arabic. So I'll take here Bardi's example. So this clause can be nominalized into the nominal group. All right, so as I said earlier, my study draws inspiration from cognitive grammar, and the notion of construal or construing experience is central in this theory. It is perceived as our multifaceted capacity to conceive and portray the same situation in alternate ways. And construal in cognitive grammar can be studied using cognitive operations, and there are different classifications. I'm using Langaker's 2018 classification of construal operations. So we have specificity, prominence, perspective, and dynamicity. Specificity refers to the level of precision and detail at which a situation is characterized. Prominence suggests that in a particular state of affairs, attention is directed at a certain facet. Perspective deals with the viewing arrangement of the conceptualizers and the situation viewed. And dynamicity pertains to how a conceptualization unfolds and develops through processing time. All right, so from an SFL perspective, which is considered the most exhaustive account with respect to construal of meaning, as argued by Berry, so experience is defined as the reality that we construe for ourselves by means of language, which is kind of similar to the cognitive grammar perspective. And it deals with experience at the experiential metafunction. So it describes it at the level of the clause as a configuration of elements. So congruently, we have a process which is the central element, and we have participants, and these are involved in the realization of the process. And we have circumstances. These are optional. They can be attendant on the process. These can be present congruently or incongruently. SFL deals with experience through the transitivity system, which, as you know, takes the transitive and ergative models into account for a comprehensive description. So here I'm using Halliday and Matheson's classification of process types. So material processes look at clauses or at processes that construe that are construed in the outside world. Mental processes construe processes of sensing, verbal processes cover any kind of symbolic exchange, and relational processes cover processes of being and having. As for ergativity, it basically answers the question of, is the process brought about from within or from outside? So if there is no external agent involved here, it would be called middle, and if there is, it would be called effective. Okay, so my study uses a comparative framework because SFL aims to be a theory for all languages, and so investigating the differences between systems of meanings of two languages helps reach this objective. So it looks at nominalization in English, which is the most examined language from an SFL perspective. However, it is still understudied in certain areas, including nominalization. It also looks at nominalization in Arabic. Some work has begun from an SFL perspective, like Bardli, Maalla, and Salami Bakhluti. So my research aims to contribute to these earlier studies. I've looked at nominalization in a specific context, which is news reports, which is understudied. Well, journalistic writing is in general is understudied compared to academic writing with respect to nominalization. The communicative purpose of news reports is informative. So they should be objective, written in neutral language, and also free from the journalist interference. So these are the research questions of my study. First, what are the cognitive effects of nominalization in news reports? Also, what are the different process types nominalized in news reports in English and Arabic? How is agency employed in English and Arabic through nominalization? Moving to the methodology section. So as I stated earlier, my study looks at journalistic writing since it's understudied. It examines specifically news reports dealing with the theme of immigration, which is considered a controversial theme. It's a small corpus, as you can tell. It consists of 14,909 words, distributed almost evenly between the two subcorpora, and the total number of texts is 26. As you can tell, Arabic texts tend to be shorter compared to English, so we have 16 Arabic texts compared to 10. All right, so basically my study uses a corpus-based approach. It examines nominalization from an SFL perspective quantitatively and qualitatively from both cognitive grammar and SFL. It uses the UIM corpus tool, precisely version 2.8.17. So again, the type of construal I looked at was how figures are turned into elements, and lexicogrammatically how clauses, this would translate lexicogrammatically into how clauses are turned into nominal groups. And I used the transitivity system that I explained earlier. Okay, so moving to results and discussion, the third section. So in a corpus of 14,909, I found 1,027 nominalizations. As you can tell, Arabic texts use about 2/3 of the total number of instances, which I found kind of interesting. These are just some examples. So in English, for example, crossing the channel to escape police violence, which is especially traumatic for those who have survived torture in their home countries. As you can see here, nominalization is not restricted to the process. The process functions as the head of the nominal group, but participants and also circumstances can also be involved and can function as modifiers. This can be optional, sometimes it can be crucial, as I will explain later. In Arabic, we have, this is a long sentence. Arabic tends to use longer sentences, more complex sentences, and the use of nominalization increases the lexical density of the clause and the text in general. So here just we can see, for example, دراسة الأسواق توضيح قدرات التنافسية المصرية وترويج المنتجات المصرية المختلفة and so on. You have the translation here. I'll move very quickly to discussing nominalization from the cognitive grammar approach. So these sets are subheads taken from an English text and an Arabic one, respectively. All the subheads in both languages, as you can see, are construed through nominal groups, which is interesting. And most nominal groups construe experience through nominalization. And I found these examples very interesting because they serve a particular purpose in news reports, because having short and similar structures contributes to the consistency of the text and also serves to capture the reader's attention. So we can say that nominalization is a distinctive feature in news report subheads and maybe news reports in general. Moving to discussing nominalization from each rubric. So nominalizations are characterized by the absence of time, which you can see, which renders the experience more schematic. Ambiguity increases by the removal of inherent participants, as in big early moves. So we don't have any participants here, just like sumud in the Arabic. Concealing the identity of the participants or assigning them as modifiers like major immigration overhaul, تجديد إجراءات الهجرة. The participants in the sense are perceived less prominent compared to the process. In other words, the writer prefers to focus on the act taking place rather than the entities involved in the realization of the act. With respect to perspective, so by altering the profile, the writer disturbs the viewing arrangement, the ideal viewing arrangement, which would be congruently realized. In other words, nominalization allows the journalist to direct the attention of the reader to any portion of the situation he or she wishes. As for dynamicity, while a congruent realization of experience takes the reader from one point at a time to the next, its metaphorical variant rather summarizes these sequences into a holistic conceptualization. All right, now I am going to discuss nominalization from an SFO perspective. So as you can see here, material clauses are the most frequent process types, which I found very interesting. The second process type that ranks second, the second process type is mental, and then verbal and relational. They have different order in each language, but they are still not as often used as material and mental processes. These are just some examples, but I'm not really going to focus on them in this presentation. I'll just restrict my talk to material processes, because again, I find this use of material processes, this dominant use of material processes, kind of interesting, because news reports are argued to be predominantly verbal. So news reports are written to report people's speech and thoughts, but also actions or events or states. And reporting current events or what is going on in the world incongruently allows the journalist to convey as many events as possible in a limited space. Okay, so let's analyze this English example. So we have the changement, the resumption of evictions of refused asylum seekers with immediate effect. So we have here two nominalizations. We have the change, which is restricted to and a pre-modifier determiner, and we have the resumption of evictions of refused asylum seekers with immediate effect. And this nominalization also includes another nominalization, which is embedded here, the evictions of refused asylum seekers. So the more nominalization is used, the less space it takes, and also this contributes to a more condensed clause and the text in general. So change here is created through conversion. Conversion, unlike gerunds like using and infinitives like to build, which are more verbal, allows the removal of inherent participants. So gerunds and infinitives actually do not really allow the removal of participants. These would be crucial in case of nominalization, because these are considered more verbal, whereas conversion is considered more nominal. So nominalization should be seen rather as a continuum, especially in terms of morphological realization. So the absence of inherent participants and the change, which the actor and goal, and the time does not really increase the ambiguity of the text in general, because they were revealed earlier in the text. And this means that nominalization helps the journalist build on prior knowledge. Resumption and evictions are created through suffixation, so resume, resumption, evict, eviction. And like conversion, suffixation allows the writer to omit the participants. In this example, the writer chooses to reveal them, so the goal and circumstance of manner here with immediate effect are present. This is an Arabic example taken from the corpus. So here we have 4 nominalizations: زيادة التصدير, عمل خريطة طريق, بدء في التنفيذ. Again, we have embedded nominalizations here. So the instances express new information and occur in the real position as new knowledge, which makes it easier for the reader to process nominalization, as argued by Carolyn. The nominalizations here are expressed morphologically as al-masdar al-asli. The first 3 nominalizations are followed by the goal, resulting in complex nominal groups. And al-masdar al-asli is the most nominal form of nominalization in Arabic. The last nominalization created by the same means consists of thing only. The goal is absent, as it is that of the preceding nominalization, so to avoid repetition. I should note that al-masdar al-mu'awwal, which is kind of similar to infinitive in English, has more verbal properties than al-masdar al-asli. In fact, the presence of inherent participants would be crucial in this case. Moving to the irrigativity analysis. So as you can tell, affective processes are more frequently used in both languages compared to middle. These are just two examples. But I'm going to discuss only affective processes because of time constraints, and you'll see in that they are more frequent. So the agent in both examples here, and we have to make asylum seekers wait in Mexico for hearings in the US immigration. And we have in Arabic دفعت السلطات القبرصية إلى تسهيل دخول اللبنانيين إلى الجزيرة وتخفيف القيود التي وضعتها بسبب تفشي فيروس كورونا في لبنان. So the agents are revealed. In other words, without these entities, the realization of the situations would not be possible. Irrigativity in English and also in Arabic can be realized through lexical, morphological, and analytical means, as discussed by Salemi Bakhnuti. And in both examples, agency is expressed analytically, but in both examples, they are expressed analytically, but the Arabic example in particular, I found very interesting because, well, let me just discuss the English one first. So wait is typically middle, and the verb make here renders the process rather effective. But in Arabic, the nominalizations tasheel and takhfif have the nominal pattern taf'il, and in Arabic, these are typically effective. But the use of dafa'at or pushed puts emphasis on the entity responsible of this action. All right, so moving to the last part, which is conclusion. So nominalization is a common feature in news reports, especially in Arabic compared to English. It has several cognitive and linguistic effects. From a cognitive grammar perspective, nominalization changes the way a situation is perceived. For example, the absence of time and participants increases the ambiguity of the situation perceived, which in turn increases the reader's interest in a text. From an SFL perspective, with respect to transitivity, so all process types are employed in both English and Arabic, and their distribution across languages is largely similar, which can be explained by the shared context. Material processes are the most common type in both languages, and reporting experiences taking place in the outside world is one of the main aims of news reports. So a news report is not restricted to reporting speech and thoughts. And this is done frequently, the reporting of current events through nominalization, well, incongruently at least, which allows the journalist to summarize as many events as possible in a concise space and to build on prior events for a coherent story. The writer's options as to what is inherent and what is not depends on the degree of deverbalization or nominalization. So nominalization should be seen as the entire nominal group, and this the presence of participants, whether it's crucial or optional, depends on the realizational means of nominalization, and this can be different. Well, this is different in each language. As for irrigativity, so the irrigativity analysis demonstrates that experiences in Arabic and more often in English are described as being realized through an external source. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Yes, I hope you're seeing the clapping hand icons here. We have.
Oh, I still can't see anything.
Oh, you see your own screen.
Should I don't know how to. Okay, just give me a second here.
Sure. While you're figuring out how to stop sharing, yeah. Have folks lined up their questions or comments. Miriam, I see you on screen, so maybe I'll start you first.
Thank you so much, Ahlam, for such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And it's so nice to see somebody working with SFL in Arabic. That's great. So my question is, have you wondered about using nominalization in like reports such as newspapers? How the reporter is hiding his bias through nominalization?
Right. In terms of ambiguity, I mean, when you take the nominal group on its own, you do tend to find that the participants are absent. But in the small corpus that I examined, I found that participants can be retrieved from the text itself. So it's not really ambiguous. but I did kind of expect to find some ambiguity. Maybe this would come up in a larger corpus, which is, again, I'm doing this as part of my PhD project, so maybe I'll find some like different answers, or yeah.
Thank you.
But yeah, I did have that question at first, because I looked at news reports before, and I looked at reporting strategies, and news reports are seen as being objective. Well, they're supposed to be objective, but actually they're not. When it comes to reporting strategies, they tend to use specific strategies to rather interfere with the utterance itself. They may look objective at first, but by changing the situation, how the situation is perceived, or by changing others' words, this can influence the reader, and this would be done on purpose, I presume, because they're not allowed to really express their opinion, like in editorials. I'm also working on editorials. This is a comparative study. So I think I will find more interesting results when I compare the two subgenres. But thank you very much for your question.
Oh, thank
I
you.
still haven't figured out how to.
Looking forward to your publications.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
All right, we have some agreement on the answers you were expressing, or continued questions you were expressing, Alam, and then also another question from Ian.
Hi, thanks very much. I find anything to do with grammatical metaphor and media very interesting, so that was great. I know you've looked at a very small corpus, but first of all, sorry, I missed, what subgenres are you going to be comparing?
Yeah, news reports and editorials, because the news reports are seen as objective, whereas editorials are seen as subjective. So the writer is allowed to share his opinion. So maybe there will be more ambiguity there. This is why but I haven't looked at editorials yet. I focused mainly on news reports, but I intend to do that in the future.
I think that'll be really interesting. Again, your corpus is small, but have you found that there are particular fields where grammatical metaphor seems to be more prominent, i.e. particular topics or issues that are spoken about? Any patterns that you found there?
I'm sorry, you mean in news reports, or? Well, I looked at only news reports dealing with immigration, because it's a controversial topic, so English versus Arabic there. But I haven't really looked into that yet, but I assume I'll find some interesting results as well. I'll share with you if you want.
Thanks. I probably should have specified particular sort of topics of discussion within the broader theme of immigration. Thanks.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I also am so interested by the past few presentations that kind of assign different reasons for the use of nominalization in news reports to keep readers' interests, as you mentioned, or to achieve some degree of objectivity, as Dr. Fromm was mentioning. So that's an interesting thought that's on my mind after listening to these presentations in order. Jen, I see your hand up as well.
As long as there isn't somebody else, I've had more than my fair share. Thank you very much. I found that quite interesting. I'm not a cognitive grammarian. I'm aware of it, but not very much. And on slide number 25, you made a reference to the ambiguity. The nominalization essentially sets up some ambiguity, which generates interest in the reader. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit more, please. I was curious about that, if that's your assertion or what the cognitive grammar literature states.
Yeah, I'll share my screen again if you want to.
Sure, I just wanted a bit more background on the ambiguity leading to interest.
Yeah, I'll just, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
It was slide 25, I believe.
Okay, thank you. You mean this one, the slide?
No, it was a comparison of functional and cognitive grammar and the implications of nominalization.
25, that was conclusion.
Yes.
Okay.
See there on the cognitive grammar, you indicate absence of tense and participants increases the ambiguity of the situation, which in turn increases the reader's interest. And so I was just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit more, please.
Right, right. So I have here some examples. All right, I have some examples here. And change of tone, for example, big early moves as well. These are subheads. And as you can tell, well, first, the absence of time. When it comes to nominalization, there's always the absence of time. So there's the ambiguity factor there. And when you continue reading, the writer tends to unreveal the participants. When it comes to change of tone, then we know who he's talking about. We know the exact topic that he's referring to. So at first, when you read the subhead, you feel the urge to continue reading in order to find out who he's referring to. This is also found in Arabic. So this is why I said the participants are revealed in the text. Again, it's a small corpus. I don't want to overgeneralize. They are revealed throughout the text. So in the subheads, they are kept just hidden. But when you go on into reading the entire, even just the entire sentence or the subsequent line, you would find the participants and also the circumstances involved in the realization of the process. I don't know if I answered your question.
I didn't disagree with anything that you said. It was just the assertion that it increases interest.
I don't know. Maybe that was just personal. I don't know. I don't want to overgeneralize.
That's
but
fine.
I assumed. I guess I
About
assumed.
it.
Yeah.
If this is from the literature, or if this is your assertion, and I don't necessarily disagree that level of congruence and metaphoricity can certainly have an impact on it. I was just curious as to where the assertion was coming from and if that's part of your contribution to the work here.
Oh, that was just I guess my personal assumption. But I'll have to look it up. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, we are out of time in this session for today, and I have a feeling could discuss much longer, but Alem, you're welcome to leave your contact info in the chat for folks who want to reach out with other questions. Otherwise, yeah, please join the audience in offering some thanks for this fourth session today. What an interesting panel, and thanks to everyone who joined us. I will